Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Petra. I'm the head of developer connections here at Prisma, and I'll be moderating this panel about database tools and how to work with databases and the developer experience around that.
Thanks, Petra. I am Søren Baumer, the founder of Prisma. We have been on this mission for 8 years now to simplify how developers work with databases and data in general. And I'm really excited to talk to all of you about the journey you have been on and how it all interconnects in this world of data DX that we're here to talk about today.
Hey, I'm Tudor. I'm a CTO at Zeta. We are a Postgres data platform. This is how we call ourselves. Basically, it's a Postgres service, and we add a bunch of add-ons on top, mostly focused on developer experience. So I'm looking forward to this. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Hi, my name is Deepthi Sigreddy. I'm an engineer at PlanetScale, where we focus on developer experience for databases, specifically MySQL compatible database. And I am an early engineer at PlanetScale, and I've been there from the beginning. So I've seen this developer experience evolve over the last 5 years, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's perspective on it.
Hey everyone, my name is Peter. I'm the CEO and founder of Snaplet, where our mission is to give developers access to production-like data. And before that, I was the co-creator of a JavaScript framework called Redwood.js.
I am Glauber Costa, and I am the founder of Turso. There are many ways to explain what Turso is. I think today, for the purpose of this discussion, I will go with a user-contributed description of Turso, the crazy folks who fork SQLite. This is us, and before that, I had around 10 years of experience in the Linux kernel, and later at a petabyte scale NoSQL database called Scylla, where I was an early engineer. So I've been around systems design, systems programming, and databases for a long time as well.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. It's going to be so great to hear how you all think about developer experience. I think all of us understand so much about how people work with databases and how we have been working on making that experience better and great, and how we can contribute to users using databases more easily. And I think, Glauber, you mentioned Turso logo and name, and I think that's how some engineers like I did in the past feel about databases, where a little bit of help in terms of database developer experience always helps, because it's sort of this monster maybe in the background where we're not really sure how to use databases. And it's so amazing to have all of these tools that really help us work with databases in an amazing way that was not available 10, 20 years ago.
A lot of the things that we see in the industry, and this is true in general, not only of databases, is accidental complexity. You're coming up with these great ideas to fix problems that you wouldn't have had to begin with if things start in a different direction. And I'm not going to claim that all of the issues that we have with databases are just accidental complexity. Some of them are real complexity. But in a sense, SQLite is this going back to the basics and let's forget everything. Let's keep it simple, right? And if we keep things extremely simple, right? What can we do with that? Can the developer experience be 10 times better? Can we do things like you just develop locally without connecting to anything? So we've been doing this for a long time. We've been playing around with that idea for a long time. So we like to think of ourselves. I mean, the logo is not supposed to be scary. It's not supposed to be like the bad monster. It's supposed to be the good monster. And we're trying to make it friendlier. We'll have updates to that.
So there's accidental complexity and there's necessary complexity. And sometimes what you are aiming for with developer experience is how you hide that complexity from the developers. And that's why you need a platform or multiple platforms represented here, because to provide certain properties of the system, scalability, availability, what have you, sometimes you do need complexity.
Absolutely. Yeah. But then again, like personally, I feel that the things that are necessary complexity, and I like the way you put it, the things that are necessary complexity are exactly the things that you can solve with like layers and platforms and et cetera. Because now I am allowing you to do something that is complex by nature, and I'm trying to make it easier. The problem sometimes happens when this is masking accidental complexity, right? Because then you would have a much simpler solution by just removing a lot of layers, and instead of having to present you with a new platform concept. And for what it's worth, I think your company in particular is a company that does this very well. right? So I'm not saying that, but there is a distinction that I think goes beyond databases, but in particular in databases, any complex systems, what is accidental complexity and what is necessary complexity.
I think what's important also is to phrase like the point in time when you're trying to reduce complexity. One of the things that we focused on when we were building Redwood.js was we split the development experience into different parts. We had design time. I'm busy building software. When I'm busy building software, what are things that suck? And then there's build time. I'm getting ready to ship to a server. What are the things that are terrible? And then there's like production time, runtime. There are things there that are also terrible. But there are different people that are responsible for those different segments of your life cycle of application software development. So it's like in each one of those segments, there's innovation that can happen towards developer experience.
So what I would add on the topic of complexity in the database, and I think it's interesting. I think all of us here are building on existing open source projects that are pretty long, right? Like PlanetScale on MySQL, and then Turso on SQLite, and we do on Postgres. And I think the reason for that is none of us really wanted to start a database from scratch, because then what you happen, you're basically just rediscovering all the errors that others have solved in the past. So that that accidental complexity is maybe the cost of getting to a system that's really successful and that has like a lot of applications built on top of them, a lot of developers really liking those systems and such. And then like we're trying to we like the way to reduce this complexity is of course to mask some things, but at the same time you have to be careful not to mask the things that people like, and not everyone is going to like the same things, right? So I think it's quite an interesting balance on what you mask, what escape hatches you have. It's like maybe it's not in the default developer experience, but if you need some some crazy join and with some extension and so on, that should still be possible, right?
I built at least one database from scratch, and it's not fun. In fact, when I told, well, it's fun, but at the same time, it's completely just I wouldn't do it again. 1 out of 10, don't recommend. I mean, it's just it's great, but it's not. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and especially in the SQL world. I mean, I think there's an opportunity. I don't think there's anybody represented here that is not doing any things around SQL, as far as I understand. But in the NoSQL world, I think there is some opportunity still to do things from scratch, because you can pick a domain, you can pick a niche, and you can say, hey, I'm going to solve this small problem here. But the surface area for SQL, after decades, how many decades we've been doing this for, it's just so much built that for you to catch up, I mean, and start from scratch is just doesn't sound like the smartest idea in the planet.
Exactly. Like a key value store, the API surface area is pretty small, so you can do that. But SQL, there's all the features that have been added over time, and they were added because someone needed them, right? So it's going to be really hard to do it from scratch. But there are definitely people that are still doing that. So I don't want to, I look forward to new database systems showing up.
I think it's not just the features, right? Just that there is the history of how people use the features. Right? You put a new feature out, and I think this is one of the things that we, as people building on the open source, correct me if you disagree, by the way, please, but it's not only that we don't have to code a feature, is that we know exactly how people use that feature, and we know what matters. And to your point, that we don't want to mask the right thing. Like when we were working, for example, in my previous company, there were many things that we put out that were very innovative, again, in the NoSQL world. But you spent 6 months, 9 months, however much time developing database. Things in the database world tend to take a long time to develop, so there's that as well. You put it out and you don't necessarily know how people are going to use it. So you have all those assumptions, and let's not even focus on the performance stuff, only on the developer experience. You have all these assumptions about how the workflow will be once somebody touches that. and then you give it to them, they use it in a completely different way, or they imagine this in a completely different way. And by building on open source, by building on established technologies, it's not just the features that you inherit, you also inherit all the history of how people use this. So you can do a much better job in focusing on, oh, I know that those are the problems that people have with this particular feature set. So let's focus on that. You don't have to imagine.
That's a great point. I think that approach is actually what is driving the current focus on developer experience, because people have been using SQL and NoSQL databases for SQL for 40 plus years, NoSQL for 20 plus years. So the pain points have become obvious, and that has created the opening and the opportunity for people like the group here to come in and say, these are the problems we are going to solve. We are not going to rebuild hash join, by the way. We are going to make XYZ, schema changes, deployments, the things that are actually hurting developers. We are going to make those better.
One interesting tension I would like to dig into a little bit with you is hiding complexity on one side, and then on the other side, really wanting to enable developers to get access to all the underlying functionality. And I think there's an interesting contrast between PlanetScale, which is just MySQL with a bunch of stuff, but you interface it as MySQL. And then SATA on the other side that couples together multiple databases and does some data synchronization under the hood, which gives you a lot of benefit, but it also becomes less standard, more of a black box that developers need to understand. Maybe Tudor, you could start by unpacking that a little bit, the benefit versus the con of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give people a little bit of context, so the way Zeta works is that we store the data in Postgres, and that's the source of truth. But we also automatically replicate it to Elasticsearch, from where we offer especially search functionality, including things like vector search, hybrid search, this kind of stuff, and also aggregation support, because like Elastic can be used more as an OLAP type of database. And so far, and actually that's changing a little bit. We have learned our lessons a bit. So far, we have proposed our own API, so we didn't offer direct SQL access. Like direct access to Postgres, we weren't offering. We were offering our own API, and that made things really easy for people to get started. And this was our initial focus. Like we said, let's make a database that's powerful, but as easy to use as like almost like a local database. And we took actually quite a lot of inspiration from Airtable in their data model and in how they present things in the UI and so on. We really wanted to make something that's super easy to use.
Would you say that that actually makes the developer experience when working with databases more complex to create a good developer experience, because you have to cater for both these escape hatches and making sure that you can enable everything that these underlying databases can do, while you also want to make sure that it's easy to use and that you cater for the use cases also where you can simplify and you can provide a much better developer experience than what the underlying technology would. So you have to sort of balance this and make sure that you really can cater for both worlds, I guess, in a sense.
Yeah, I think that tension is definitely there, even at PlanetScale, where the interface is SQL. The interface is not SQL for everything, because the parts that MySQL didn't do well, like schema changes, we said you will do them differently. So that's a totally different experience versus just opening up a MySQL client and executing ad hoc queries. So those two things do need to coexist, and they also need to feel somewhat seamless.
Yeah, that's another really good example that also we hit at Zeta. So we have this system to do schema changes with zero downtime, and you can roll back and you can have the application talk like the old and the new version talk to your database and feel like there was no upgrade and so on. But then the issue is people are using Prisma migrations or Django migrations, or like almost every framework or any programming language has the kind of their preferred way of doing schema changes. And then you have to be compatible with how people are doing things. Otherwise, like too few people are going to adopt that feature and get the benefit of it.
The strength of the ecosystem is a core component of data DX, and it's a really important thing that developers look at and evaluate when they pick new tooling. So when you start a new database company like SATA, and you need to figure out what existing ecosystem can you sit in. And if you are not sitting in an existing ecosystem, you need to make damn sure that this new ecosystem you're building is actually worth it, so that people will pick it. And for you, Dipti, at PlanetScale, you're clearly positioned inside the MySQL ecosystem. But then you step outside a little bit and you say, migrations, actually, we think we can do this better. Do you find that you are far enough into the MySQL ecosystem that you benefit from the strength of that community, or is that a sticking point for new users when they come to you?
I don't think it's really a sticking point for new users, but definitely new users have a lot more options to choose from versus people who are already in MySQL and comfortable with MySQL, right? Let's be honest, there's SQLite, there's Postgres, there are many options. Like Glauber said earlier, many of the core problems, the optimization of queries, the query execution, those things MySQL does well enough that we don't have to worry about them. And that actually frees us up to worry about the developer experience.
What do you think some of the core challenges are that you are solving with PlanetScale so that you can give a better developer experience when working with that underlying database? What do you think the biggest solutions are to make that developer experience better?
So to some extent, this goes back to what Peter was saying, where you segment the developer experience into the development time versus deployment time versus production time. So schema changes are actually problematic both at development time and deployment or production time, because historically deploying large schema changes to MySQL has resulted in the database locking up, not taking queries, and so on and so forth, right? And for developers, and I was in this position, not with MySQL, but with Oracle 20 years ago, where if you want to make a schema change, you have to go through a DBA. You have to write out a change request and so on and so forth, right? There are certain things which span that spectrum of development, deployment, and production. And there are certain things that are specific to one part of them. And availability and scalability are actually specific to when you go into production, because you're not so worried about them at development time. Database went down, I'll just restart it. It's a toy database, right? And those are things that we are able to do very well because of the open source technology that we are using, Vitess, which has already solved that problem of how do you keep a distributed system available and how do you scale it. So the solutions to each of the problems are sometimes the same and sometimes different depending on which part of this develop, deploy, production flow you are trying to solve it for.
We talk about this idea of a different set of experiences needed when you are applying data changes in production versus deploying data changes in development. And I think, to my mind, PlanetScale is the gold standard for how you deploy data schema changes in production. And I think at Snaplet, you are aspiring to build the gold standard for how to change the data schema in development. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that developers really need access to when they're making schema migrations is the data itself. They need to be able to test their schema migrations against the data set that they expected to run against in production. And if you can't branch your database, or if you just don't have access to something that looks like the actual data in production, you're kind of doing it blindly, and you're going to hit problems that you just couldn't have expected. And one of the things that I find quite surprising is that you would expect the schema to be the source of truth for how the data is represented in the database. In other words, like some of the things that I've seen is like it's a not nullable column, and you'll get a situation with Postgres in some databases that we've worked in where it is null, and it's impossible to understand how that happened. It's a database. It isn't infallible. But if you don't have access to that data, what do you do? And I think that's one of the things that's really important for developers, is just to have visibility, because otherwise they're operating under assumptions And those assumptions are always going to lead to bugs. And they're going to lead to bugs in production. So that's what Snaplet is doing, or trying to do, is give developers access to data without privacy concerns or like scalability concerns and things in Postgres.
I also really like how all of these tools work well together to create an even better developer experience. So if you use Prisma together with Snaplet and you use it with PlanetScale, you get all the benefits of all of these things, and we all bring our opinions and expertise to make the developer experience better from a specific angle. And then it's amazing to see how these data DX tools can work well together to create something even better as a whole.
Yeah, I come from a position of a product developer, so that's my lens. I'm trying to improve the experience for people like me. And one of the things that I've always struggled with is having to go to someone in a different part of my organization and get access to things from them when I just want to, fix bugs and build features and ship. That's it. I don't want to have to deal with the complexity of getting access to data.
When I started 20 something years ago, doing this crazy, at the time, like a unproven thing that I was criticized for doing, called open source. Today is it's what everybody does. But like when I started contributing to the Linux kernel and orienting my career towards open source, one of the things that resonated with me was exactly this idea that with open source, you don't ask for permission. You don't have to ask anybody for permission to do anything, like anything. I, as a college student, I started contributing to, at the time, one of the most complex projects out there, both socially and technically. I never had to ask anybody for permission, right? I just did it. And I find it very interesting that what is open source is a different question, especially now, like we see with AI, open models, but those principles of open source, right? They stuck with us one way or another, and they come back in situations like that. Part of this created a great developer experience for developers back then. Like, I want open source. I don't want to go through Oracle. I don't want to go through Microsoft. I don't want to do any of that because I don't want to ask for permission. This creates a human problem, right? And in a sense, a good developer experience today in databases have to inherit the same property, right? Just don't ask for permission. Just have things that allow you to just do what you need to do.
It's like this rebel hacker mentality, right?
Exactly.
Like going against the grain a little bit. And
maybe it's because we're all introverts. So every time you have to talk to someone, you'll just say,
Or just like, nah. When you forked the SQLite, that was quite a controversial move, right? Like, there was a lot of pushback when you did that, when you launched this blog post on Hacker News.
Absolutely.
I felt for you, but you handled it really well.
Thank you.
So when you think about that fork, what are some of the DX improvements that enabled you guys to make happen?
Schema changes. That's why I was asking Gypty that question, because like schema changes in SQLite are extremely painful, but they're painful in a way that they're different than MySQL. Like they're painful because they're restrictive. It's not about taking the database down or anything like that. The way people use SQLite is very different. So one of the things that for example, if you go to our pricing page, you're going to see that in our $29 a month plan, we offer people 10,000 databases, which is like a mind-blowing number. But that's because the way people use SQLite traditionally is like those very small per user databases, etc. So it's not. I don't think we'll ever see like a petabyte database on SQLite. PlanetScale may have a couple of petabyte databases, or at least many terabytes. So they're painful in a different way than MySQL. They're painful because there is a lot of stuff that you just can't do.
Glavo, you mentioned a thing here that I would like to dive into a little bit. You said 10,000 databases on the cheap plan. That's really cool. And one of the things I've been looking for the last 10 years is I want databases to be more like pages in Notion. I didn't know it was called Notion back then, but now I know. I want databases to be like pages in Notion. They should be easy to create, virtually free, and then you shouldn't have to worry about them. They should just work. I never have to babysit a Notion page. I leave it there, I come back, it still works. And I think there's maybe a tension between those two things, because the page just working always, PlanetScale does that really, really well. I create a database at PlanetScale, it just works. No matter the amount of traffic, it keeps working. Then there's the other side of it that I want. I want to be able to create thousands of these, millions. And if I go to planet scale and try to do that, it gets really costly. So is there a tension? Is there some future development for the product to happen? Maybe you start with you, Dipti, and then Glava, you can talk a bit about your 10,000 databases.
That's a pretty difficult question for us to answer right now. I think what a future could look like is that that people end up using something like Terso in development, where they can get 10,000 and then they find a path to deploying that database into production if they need to. So there are many people who want to try something out, use a database for a few days, and then they're done. They just throw it away. They never come back to it, right? But there is the minority of people who eventually want to take that database into production. So maybe there is a way where you do that with SQLite and eventually migrate to MySQL. So
of course.
that's the
but like the way we think about this multiple databases is it's, well, some people definitely use it like that, and there are some people, we offer 500 for free, by the way, just so there are some users that are just using this for like different projects. Creating a database is so cheap. I will architecture things in a way where I create a lot of them. Like if you were doing this on planet scale, you would potentially create a big database and give every user their own tables. But then you also have a limit on tables, and then you might create a table with a lot of users. But for us, you just like you go and create a database. But I will be lying, Soren, if I say like this. Yeah, you're never going to have any problems with that. This is why the NoSQL movement exists, because people realize that okay, SQL is great, but there are limits here. That so after you're out of those limits, you have to go do something else, and you have to re-architecture your things, right? So part of the reason Planet scales very well is I understand, and Deeply will keep me honest and correct me if I'm wrong. It's not because of MySQL; it's because of Vitess. Right? Vitess is a scale-out architecture, right? It's a naturally sharding architecture that inherits a lot of things from the NoSQL world. It allows horizontal scalability and allows you to, but it comes with its own set of problems as well, because now you need to make sure that you're hitting the right node or anything like that. So there is always going to be this trade-off here. This choice will always have to be yours. If you ever expect you want to have multiple databases and use it like Notion, if you ever expect one particular database for one user to have 10 billion requests per second and grow to 2 terabytes, it probably doesn't fit the model, right? So you have to do something else. Either you say, now let me try to find a way to move all of those 10,000 databases to table representations on planet scale, or you're going to say, look, that's fine for this one user, that one user, that one database, then one user that justifies the cost. I'm going to have to, because it's a business interest of mine, I'm going to have to deal with a different schema, with a different language, and take it away and use a hybrid system. But everything has its limits, right? And we scale decently well. Like SQLite scales very well for reads, especially with the replication that we present. But it's not going to scale that well for writes. It's not going to scale that well in the amount of data that you can handle. Like you're never going to store more data than you can fit in a box, unlike something like Vitess. So there are always things that are architecturally set for you, and you as a user have to make the choice.
Yeah, I think another issue with this tenant per database approach is you have to be pretty sure that you don't need queries cross tenants, right? Because then you're going to have to do them in your application or something like this. So there's definitely tensions, I think, between this, and then to some degree, this idea of having like a database, like a Notion page, is the whole reason Zeta exists. Kind of, we were just using Airtable as an example rather than Notion. It was more popular back then, but like that was our reason, and the way we did it was by using different schemas in Postgres, essentially namespaces. So you can put many tenants if you want, or many development branches, or what have you, on the same Postgres cluster, right? But then what you hit on the other side is the noisy neighbor type of issues, where one user can create a load that impacts the others. So then what we did was to have the ability to abstract a little bit and have multiple database in one instance and other databases in another instance. So the impact zone of an issue is more localized, right? So we're doing a little bit of an abstraction between the database endpoint that you're hitting and where it is stored on which of the Postgres clusters and such, right? Um, but yeah, that's definitely one of these tension points that's just hard to solve.
A lot of people who use Prisma, I think the value is that they have optionality. They can start in one place and they can use something like a SQLite, and then they know that with very little effort they can migrate to a different platform like PlanetScale, AtScale. So, Glauber, when you talk to people who come and look at Terso and might be nervous about buying into this new ecosystem, is that a conversation you had with them? The fact that it is just SQL, you could use something like Prisma, and then if they get stuck for whatever reason, they can always move on to something else.
It has to do with this optionality, like that I want to, like, as a principle. It's one of the principles of open source that stuck with us. I don't want to be constrained by anything. I don't want to be changed to anything. So I want to be always have the optionality of moving out for whatever reason. And then you ask them the reason. They said, "I don't know. I don't care. Like, I will have my reasons in the future." This is a future me question. It's not a present me question. Again, lots of people who come to us, especially because of the ecosystems that we target in JavaScript and etc., already come with their ORM of choice. And right, so it's not that we have a lot of choice in that matter. They come and say, "Hey, we're using Prisma. How can I use Prisma with Terso?" So I don't think this is a question that we hear a lot specifically, but we do hear questions about, can I download my SQLite file? Right? Can I export the data? So the optionality is there, and I am sure it's on people's mind. So I mean, I think they don't ask us that because it's an obvious question for them, but I'm sure it's on their mind. I mean, I would not want to write raw SQL. I want to use something like Prisma because I want to have this optionality. So again, I think optionality is something that everybody wants. They want it because future me may think differently than present me for whatever reason. Right? So just I want to know that I can get out of that.
We do get this, not so much in terms of being able to take the data and migrate to some other type of database, but just in terms of, if I want to leave, can I leave? And that's one of the guarantees we've tried to provide at PlanetScale from the very beginning. We are not going to hold your data hostage. If you want to leave, you get to take your data with you.
Yeah, I think even more important than the storage format is the protocol, because that's what people depend on in their applications, right? And that's why that's I guess one of the main reasons for which we pick Postgres, that it has this very open protocol with like you can implement it in multiple languages, and you can use the source code in different languages and such. You can basically do more behind the same protocol, and by being super open about the wire protocol, Postgres also like wins more mindshare, right? Because then you have alternative implementations like CockroachDB and Yugabyte and so on, and so that you can do more interesting stuff. So yeah, we could standardize on SQLite as the storage layer and Postgres wire protocol. That would be great.
I've seen customers migrate, again, take 3 months to move their data from one place to the other with a Spark cluster reading from one and writing to the other and dual writes. People were willing to do this, right? Not everybody, and it is a barrier, and right, just it's not trivial, but people were willing to do this, but they were not willing to change their code, right? So I guess I'll never understand it because I'm a programmer. I love changing the code. That's what I do. I do it for fun. But people in business settings were able to go through extreme pains to migrate the data, but they would rather not touch the code. And that is exactly, I think, the role that a tool like Prisma can play, because ultimately you don't change your code. If you want to go from one thing to the other, if you want to have this optionality, which everybody, my claim is that everybody wants, you don't have to change your code.
It's a really astute point, and what Prisma brings to the table is really a more constrained API to your data that works the same no matter what database you're working against. That constrained API is also limiting, right? It means there are certain things you can't do. But then we have escape hatches. So you can still do raw SQL queries, and you should go and do those. But now you have them marked, they're over here, you have 7 of them. All your normal stuff is through this constrained API, and that you can move between databases as you want to. Gives you a lot of optionality as a developer picking what database you're using. But it also gives us an opportunity to introduce tooling in between, because now we have that central point where everything is going through. It's a more constrained problem than general SQL. So we can do more interesting things, and that's where we are heading as a company now. And I would like to use this to get to you, Dipti, and ask, where's PlanetScale going? Because you have this amazing RDS replacement, like a MySQL database that just works. And you also have Vitesse, which is this centralized platform that enables you to do all kinds of interesting things. So are you going to broaden out and have more of a data platform, or will you stay narrow and be the scalable MySQL database?
I think the focus in the short term has to be on getting more and more large databases migrated into PlanetScale, because really that's one of our strengths. And developer experience is a part of the package, but you will realize the full benefits and the full potential of PlanetScale on large sharded databases, right? And those are the people for whom there are very few options. In the longer term, we have to see where we end up in terms of what feedback we get from users. Right now, we are still sort of leading with features. For instance, query insights. That is very popular and very useful. Where do we take that next? Or what is the next query insights? These are some things that we have to figure out. So I don't have a great answer in terms of whether we will turn it into a data platform. Maybe, maybe not.
Thank you. I have so many ideas for where you could go, but obviously, you know where you're going.
Well, I was just thinking, I have an idea for where you could go. Make those migrations happen. People want to migrate their data from SQLite to MySQL. Do it through Prisma.
So broadening out from there, what do you think are the next DX challenges that would make developers' lives easier? What do you think that you all can help developers with to make their lives easier, just like we have done and you have done over the last 5, 10 X years? What are the next great things to improve?
There's lots that we can discuss. I think schema changes was discussed here quite a bit, and there's a good reason for that. In general, I'm kind of just happy that this wave of databases that exist focus a little bit less on the raw performance and scalability, and focus a little bit more on the developer experience and operational aspects of it. And schema change is one of them. But then I think there's still a lot of improvements that we can do, especially in the Postgres land, so to say, with what I call more like janitorial issues. Like people have issues with vacuum or transaction ID overlap and so on, and getting visibility in that. Oftentimes it takes them by surprise and so on. And these are things that we just can do better, I think, and that will get us also a step closer to this, idea of a database like a Notion page, essentially.
I like that.
Yeah. So this schema changes the serverless aspect so that it kind of just works and you don't have to worry about. And then it's also like things like scalability, like going beyond the threshold, that happening automatically, so it's cost effective, right? So auto scaling based on your traffic, so you only pay based on like how much you actually consume. Now you don't have to set like a very you don't have to over provision your databases and such, these kind of things.
Tudor, the thing that I think you are quite advanced in, and I would like, that's why I asked you before, Dipti, about this data platform. What else could you do? Tudor, you couple different databases together, Postgres and Elasticsearch, and it happens seamlessly to the end user. So I think now we're getting to a point where individual databases, they work really well, but it's still a mess to be working with multiple databases. What is your single source of truth? How does data flow? All of that is kind of left up to the developer, to the application developer who doesn't know how to build these systems. And I think SATA has taken a first step at defining how should that work.
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
I'm very surprised that Kafka is not in your picture, Tudor. It was in ours to some extent, because if you go talk to enterprises, like
we do have
there's always a lot of Kafka. There's always a lot of Kafka.
I think I only let it out of the diagram because I didn't want to complicate it too much. But we do use Kafka internally, and we do base a lot on this idea of change data capture. So like we get a stream of events from Postgres, and that you can use for a number of things. For cache invalidation, for example, like you can cache the data on the edge or a centralized cache, but then you can automatically invalidate it. Things like this. We replicated the data in Elasticsearch, and we do want to open it up a little bit more to do like webhooks. So you can now like call webhooks and this type of things. I think Prisma is working on in that space as well, right? With Prisma Pulse, that's pretty similar stuff. Yes.
You actually made a really good point by bringing this up, because so far the focus of developer experience has been on the application developer, but we have a growing cadre of data developers, data engineers who need similar improvements in their developer experience.
That's really interesting. And they need to tie that data to the operational data, right? They don't need to just work on the data warehouse that gets a dump once a day or something. They need access to the real data that is powering the applications.
For me, everything always starts with visibility, right? It's just I would love to have, and again, Prisma is in a great position to deliver something like that, but a cross database, cross ecosystem ways to visualize what you're doing, understand what you're doing. And I think it ties to some extent with what Deepti just mentioned, not just operational developers, but like data people. They need to understand, like, what is my data, what is in here, what are the patterns that are here, like and then the operational aspect is like, what are the query patterns, what is happening, what is just what's going on. And there is a lot of this what is going on that happens in lower layers. But I think one thing that I would expect to see, and I would love, maybe I'm wishful thinking here, but I would love to see, is this moving up to more upper standardized layers in which I can have to say, oh, now I'm using Prisma. Now I have visibility and observability over everything I do, regardless of how I do. So one can dream.
Yeah.
I guess also it's almost obligatory at this point to talk about AI and ML. And if we look at how people had to build their machine learning systems, to start with, everybody basically said, okay, I have all this data. I'm going to store it in files, and I'm going to write some code to process the files, store the embeddings or features in some general purpose database, and you have all this custom stuff around it, right? But we are seeing that there are databases which are coming up which specialize in these use cases, where they hide this complexity from the machine learning researcher so that they don't have to write all this code, and they can configure these databases and say, here is my data, load it. It will load it somewhere. And then they are able to run their models on that data, and these specialized databases are taking care of keeping everything in sync, up to date, whatever you want to call it, and providing that sort of a developer experience in this specialized field.
In the beginning of the year, we saw an absurd amount of money being invested into vector database companies. The stuff you talked about, Deepti, is that vector databases? Are any of you building vector databases, or are we talking about something else that is even above or beyond?
I think there are two categories. One is there are specialized vector databases that people are building, but also most general purpose databases have either announced vector support already or they're working on it and they say it's coming, and that includes MySQL.
I think this is probably also a good spot to take a wrap. We have went from Oracle in the past issues with databases, from migrations all the way to vector databases and AI. We've covered a lot of ground in terms of how developer experience has been, is, and will be when working with all of these database tools. And I think it's been amazing to hear from all of you with the different aspects and the different opinions and how it all really comes together in one picture of wanting to make developer experience better, because that's I think the bottom line of and the essential of building amazing applications in the future.